Johnny, what a great delight to have you with us today.
Hey, Perry, great to be with you.
Man, what led you to get into this, to write this one?
Well, I really believe that Jesus chose to be fully God and fully human for a reason. And I thought we'd written lots of books and talked a lot about Jesus' divinity, but it's in his humanity that we really get and understand grace. We understand how we're to live our lives. We understand what could happen if we did live the way Jesus lived his. And so I decided to write a book on the dirty God, the Jesus who had dirt under his fingernails.
Yeah. Well, it's an inspiring book, and if Jesus was walking on earth today, where would you think we would find him?
Now, I think we'd find him with regular people. I don't think he would be in the gilded sanctuaries. I don't think he would be the subject of sophistication. I think he could relate to those people, and he did relate to those people. But I think we find in the Bible, and we would find in our day today, a Jesus that does everything he can to relate to the rest of us. And, Jesus chose to be born in the city he was born in. He chose to live the life he lived. He chose to be in a village of 400 people. He chose to be on earth, at least, a carpenter's son. He did all of this for a reason. And so I think that if you and I were having coffee with Jesus, the God of the universe, today, we would find ourselves talking to someone who really seemed to understand our struggles, our everyday life, who could relate to us.
You bring an interesting balance to the humanity and yet the deity, which is so critical, because sometimes we can get a little lopsided in that argument, or in that perspective. But what I appreciate was the humility that you brought to the character of Christ in his humanity. Kind of enlighten us on that.
I guess if all of us were the God of the universe, we would probably spend a lot of time brandishing our power, right? I mean, if I were Jesus, sometimes I joke, I would be like playing soccer on the Sea of Galilee. I'd be, showing up in the middle of the night in Herod's house and playing tricks on him. I mean, I would be like, when I came, I would come with like lightning and fireworks, but not Jesus. I mean, the greatest miracle, I think, in the Bible isn't Jesus raising from the dead. I mean, that's, with being careful not to sound like a heretic. I mean, that's a great miracle, but that's an expected miracle. That's what God does. But the greatest miracle is when, people could spit on him and he could resist his wrath. When Jesus could stare down and stand in front of the Pharisees, the religious leaders that were supposed to be guiding the people, and they were deceiving the people, and they were missing the Messiah, staring them right at the face. And to respond, to them in grace, not in, that kind of wrath that you read about in the Old Testament. Right. The greatest miracle of Jesus is grace in all of its various forms throughout his time here on earth.
Yeah, I want to come back to the grace issue in just a moment, but let me ask you this. Do you think the American church has gotten a little too arrogant?
Yeah, I totally believe so. I think many times in the United States, because we're largely a Christian nation, perhaps decreasingly so, but lots of people feel like we're somehow entitled to God's attention. And what we have to understand is that God's attention always comes out of God's kindness. And he's very kind and he gives us lots of attention. But just because we can, boldly walk into the throne of grace in our time of need doesn't mean that we should barge in like we own the place.
Well, it's interesting. While we're arguing among ourselves who has the truth and who doesn't, most of humanity is falling through the cracks.
Yeah, that's true. And, we have a responsibility to be to others what Jesus has been to us as individual Christians. We're to follow him and we're to tell others about him. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote Dirty God, to capture the image of the Jesus that we could relate to more. And I think that's interesting. Jesus didn't come like the Greco-Roman gods with perfect physiques, with great and grandiose temples. He came like a human being for a reason. And having gotten that grace from him, that kindness, we ought to give it to the world.
All right, let's go back to the grace issue because it's so important. And how would you define it?
Grace is God's kindness in its various forms. And so in its greatest form of him forgiving all of our sins at the cross, and in its simple form, like when he had patience with Peter over and over and over again, because he saw in Peter not who Peter was, but who Peter could become.
All right. Dirty God is, in looking through it, it appears to me this also could be used as an evangelistic tool.
Yeah, absolutely, because it shows a non-typical Jesus. You know, lots of people do not believe in Jesus because they confuse the culture of the church, the way you have to, you know, a lot of like people that aren't believers, you know, feel uncomfortable going into churches because it's a culture. You have to dress a certain way, you have to act a certain way, you have to know when to stand up, when to sit down. Some people know the song, some people don't, but what we find in this book, Dirty God, is I've really emphasized the Jesus that you can relate to where you are, the Jesus that's concerned about you, that has kindness for you as an individual. And so maybe you've heard about Jesus your entire life, but maybe you haven't quite seen this side of him.
You use a lot of stories, Johnny, in the book, which are just really terrific. Give us a couple quickly.
Yeah, you know, I open the book by talking about an experience I had in India, where I'm a student of religions. I have 2 degrees in religion. I teach religion, and I've visited lots of the holiest places around the world in teaching and in studying. And I was at this particular shrine where I showed up there. It's a Sufi shrine in India, the holiest Sufi shrine, which are Sufis are mystic Muslims. And I remembered seeing this this old lady, maybe in her 90s, very wrinkled face, begging and pleading outside the shrine of this deceased saint. He died in the 13th century, with her fingers held tight on the side of this grate next to the shrine. And I couldn't understand her language, but she was praying and she was pleading for her God to pay attention to her, just pleading with all of her might. And, you know, it hit me when I was thinking about that story and when I was writing Dirty God, that the one thing that makes Jesus different from every other idea of God in all of history is that every other idea of God has you banging and clanging and pleading and praying to try to get God's attention. Right. But the story of Jesus is God is concerned about us as individuals, and we don't have to climb up to him. He's come down to us. And so the book's filled with my experiences around the world, going to leper colonies, visiting peculiar and interesting people around the world, and seeing God do really remarkable things through everyday people.
You know, on the other hand, we've never seen such a division and whose God is the one true God as it's being played out today in all cultures. And yet that provides the great opportunity for the Great Commission to be accomplished, especially in this day in which we live. And here at the Dove with radio and television, it's amazing to me how many people are crying out for help. And these are believers. So we're in a really interesting time in world religion history, and yet it provides the opportunity for the gospel. Do you see it that way?
I do. The last chapter of the book, I talk about what could happen if Christians around the world started living this lifestyle of grace. I mean, you don't have to hang around me very, very long here at Liberty University to know that I really believe that this is the generation with the greatest potential to complete the Great Commission, and I believe they'll do it. I mean, I was just the other day with 65,000 college students in the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. I mean, at Liberty University, we have nearly 100,000 students, and we're a blatantly evangelical university. We believe the Bible is the Word of God, and Jesus is the Son of God, and he saved the world. And so I'm a huge optimist when it comes to what could happen in this generation. And actually, that's the real reason, I think the overarching reason why I wrote the book, because I believe grace is something that's both gotten and something that's given. And we live in a hyper-religious world. Atheism is not growing statistically. Right. What is growing is religion. It's a matter of which way leads the right way. And I think Jesus is really unique.
And yet we're not changing the culture very fast. It doesn't appear, at least, Johnny, that we're impacting the culture. What do you say about that?
You know, I think Jesus works in strange and mysterious ways, and I think the news media and lots of people can tell the story in the way they want to tell the story. Right. But when you're in the trenches, and the subtitle of this book is Jesus is in the trenches, and to some degree I'm in the trenches. There a few people in the country that interact with more college students probably than I do, just serving here at Liberty University, and I'm seeing amazing things all around the world. And so despite what might be floating to the surface in culture, I think this is a Saul Paul generation. I think there's very little in between. And when they get it, and lots of people are getting it.
And there seems to be a growth in Christianity among the younger people. If I could say the millennials and above a little bit, there seems to be a real turn towards Christ.
You got it. And, it's interesting. It seems like what God has done is he's custom designed a generation to reach the world. I mean, it's the most digital generation in history. It's a cause-oriented generation. I mean, lots of secular millennials, there are 80 million of them in the United States. Lots of secular ones are kind of more Christian in their cause behavior than lots of Christians are. And I'll take that. That's a first step. You can do Jesus-like things, and we can build the bridge to Jesus. And so, yeah, I think this generation really is showing really fantastic things. I mean, the group that I was just with has decided that in their generation they're going to end human slavery and sex trafficking, and they're really passionate about that. And the 65,000 I was with really believe that Jesus is the answer to all of that.
Oh, it's fascinating. Hey, Johnnie, thank you for being with us. I know your schedule is very tight. Thanks for all you do and the passion that you are certainly radiating today. The book is entitled Dirty God, Jesus in the Trenches, forward by Rick Warren, written by Johnnie Moore. There's a picture of it on the screen. Let me encourage you to check it out at Evangel or online. It's put out by Thomas Nelson. Thank you, Johnnie. We'll have you back. Keep up the fight, man. I just love your spirit.
Oh, thank you for having me. Let's do this thing.